Perfect.
Okay, so can everybody hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Right. So Simon, you want to introduce me, or am I just supposed to start?
I did an intro actually before you went online. So just tell everyone where you are because you seem to move around quite a bit. So location is a good starting point. And then move into what the heck is a mind hacker? Something to do with upgrading your mental software. And you can use technical jargon. Who would regard themselves as technical in the room? Raise your hand. Not me. So okay, don't get too technical, but still a little bit technical. Use the computer as an analogy and so on. I think just about get a head around that. All right, over to you.
Okay, so I'm currently in Warsaw. I just ran the Berlin Marathon. If anybody was there, high five. If not, you're missing out. I normally live in New York, between New York and San Francisco. I have a lot of clients in Silicon Valley. And I can actually hear myself, which is, that echo is slightly annoying. So I'm just...
Solve that.
It's okay.
Can you... Yeah, if you... Mute your microphone or?
I'm going to... Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can mute your speakers.
Okay, so I have muted myself. So if you want to ask questions, you just have to let me know, which is much better. I can hear myself. So I'm between New York City and San Francisco. I am originally from Poland, where I am right now. On my way back to New York City via London, via Berlin. And so I want to start a little bit. Give me a second. I have notes here. I don't have much time, so I really don't have. I'm just going to give you kind of the framework of what we mean by mind hacking. Now I'll start by talking a little bit about myself and what and who is SelfHackathon. Then what is the framework for mind hacking? And then finally, since this is a meetup about fundraising and IOT, I'm going to talk a little bit about money because I think money is this concept that actually is much more psychological than we think. And it turns out a lot of people have issues talking about money, asking for money. It seems to be a very intimate topic for a lot of people, and we've been trying to hack that a little bit. And some of my clients include, fintech companies and major investment banks and insurance companies. So we've been kind of playing with that a little bit and bringing much more psychology to that topic. But a little bit about myself. Sitting in front of you. My name is Patrycja, and I'm a psychologist. My background is experimental social psychology. I spent more than 10 years researching, I call it the dark side of the human nature. Because I studied was on side. I lecture. I stayed. I moved into the world of entrepreneurship. I started a couple companies. Eventually moving into the space that I call mind hacking, which is pretty much the idea is how do we take all the scientific knowledge and apply it into fields that usually don't have psychology inherently in them. And most of our clients include Fortune 500 companies, a lot of startups. We work with a lot of accelerators, as well as individual clients. The underlying basis is that success is a mind game, and it happens here, 6 inches between the ears, which is 20 centimeters between the ears, which is pretty much your mind. And if this is set straight, then everything else falls from there. And so our recent focus has been money, actually. And funny enough, Simon asked me to speak about that, and I was like, I can talk about this topic forever because it is so emotionally charged for so many people. How many of you think there's deep psychology to money, such as fear, shame, anxiety, etc.? Raise of hands. Okay. Much more. Okay. Since I work a lot with Silicon Valley companies and I work a lot with founders who raise money, who have raised money, I notice, and a lot of my research has been about the body and how kind of a lot of things are embodied inside the body. We've been noticing that there is a particular shift when people start talking about money. And we link that shift to a lot of psychological state, one of which is shame. And so something we've been working a lot recently is the deep psychology of money. But I won't go into that. I'm more than happy. You can email me and I can share some research with you because I think it's absolutely, utterly fascinating what money is for people. And we're going to dive a little bit into that today because I think it's important if you're raising money, if you're asking for money, or if you're making money for that matter, or if you have issues with money in any way, too much or too little, because, that's the spectrum. And so just a little bit of lay of the land about what we mean by mind hacking and what we do at SelfHackathon. At SelfHackathon, we are 35 scientists. I call myself the chief mind hacker. I have 35 other scientists that work with me. We span anywhere from psychology through neuroscience, through anthropology. We have big data folks that work with IBM, natural linguistic processing, you name it. We work with a lot of people, plus different experts such as, Navy SEAL snipers and professional athletes. The idea is like, how do we take scientific knowledge and apply it to human life? And so there are three major premises that we work with. The very first one is that we are living code. Okay, so how many of you are programmers? Program stuff. Okay, excellent. And so I love that. This is my favorite crowd to talk to because what we know in psychology and what we know in neuroscience that we actually are living code. And this is a code that constantly, this is the ultimate amazing code that exists. And it probably is much more sophisticated, than anything we know because it's a code that constantly wires and reworks itself. And when you look at neuroplasticity, this code, and I don't only talk about brain, but I also talk about nervous system and the body, constantly interacts with the environment and reprograms itself based on the input that it gets from the environment. So if you were to look at the human brain, you would see that it's mushy and gooey. It's in this weird state in between, being liquid and being solid. And that means it's very malleable, right? And this code constantly is reprogramming itself. We also know from psychology and neuroscience that we have new brain cells being born pretty much constantly, given that you're learning and you're changing. And then finally, when you actually look about your genes, there's an entire field in psychology called psychoimmunology as well as epigenetics, which pretty much say that based on your external circumstance, your gene expression can change. So this is a code that's extremely sophisticated, extremely smart. The cool thing about the code is you can hack the code and you can upgrade the code if you wish. And so what we do at SelfHackathon is we try to bring science and tell people how can we hack this code and how can you actually upgrade this code? Because as you probably know, the very initial layer of the code or the very initial code that you write very often is not great. The first code you write might have bugs, there might be some loops, there might be certain things missing. And so what you do is you go in and you check the code and then you upgrade the code. And that's also how we see it. We came into this world with certain code that got coded very early in the childhood, anywhere, between 3 and 7, and then, the first love and the first day to school and the first victory and the first soccer match. Those are the prime experiences that shape us and create the code. And some people stay with that code and say, this is how life is and this is who I am and this is how the world is. And then certain people are like, oh, okay, this is my old wiring. It's time for upgrade. And so just as with your phone, certain apps, we have to upgrade the system in order for apps to run. And so this is really how we see this system and this nervous system. And so I think it's extremely exciting that this code can be hacked and then upgraded. And so what I'm going to try to get to you and talk to you about today is the 4 ways that we actually get coded and we can hack ourselves and we can recode ourselves. Everybody on board so far? Okay, excellent. The second premise that we have at SelfHackathon is that the human mind is the most untapped natural resource. Right? So we try to go and mine for mercury and find gold and coal and oil, or, whatever, you name it. There are some people which I know are trying to go and mine the asteroids and the moon, right? From our perspective as psychologists, this is totally the most untapped natural resource. And so this is the source of inspiration, creativity, and collaboration, but this is also the source of things like spices and, tourism. Most of the stuff is born here. And so if you understand this code, you pretty much can see what happens afterward. And then finally, the third premise that we work with, pretty much any skill is hackable and learnable. And so a lot of things we teach people is emotional intelligence, confidence, creativity. All those skills are in a way learnable if learned and if served in the right order. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And then who's excited for tonight? Okay. Why don't you turn around and give somebody a high five? Somebody say.
Double high five.
So let's get started. I think we are your time. And Simon, you can stop me at any point, but I really want to cover as much ground as possible. And so there are 4 ways how we get coded and how we can kind of hack and upgrade ourselves. And those things are, in a way, tied to our physical body. The very first way that we get coded is with our head. The second part how we get coded is our heart. Then I'm going to talk about our body, and I'm going to talk about the social environment, because ultimately we're social animals that live in groups, and we learn by mimicry, and we love to mimic other people, and it's very hard to go against the crowd. So I'm going to talk a little about what that means. And so we're going to start with the head. And in your head, you have more or less 7,000 thoughts a day, up to 90% of which on average are the same, which means we tend to spin things in our head. We tend to think certain things which are similar day over day over day over day. In our heads, we also have assumptions and thoughts, expectations about ourselves and expectations about others. And we have rules and regulations and kind of imagination. What would happen if we broke the rule? What would happen if we violated the regulation? So I just read an article yesterday that shows that children as young as 3 years old, they start observing the adults, and based on the behavior of an adult, they form a social expectation, a rule. And then the child gets angry when somebody breaks the rule. So think about when you were 3 years old and what you saw your parents. Most likely is the fear when you started setting expectations and rules of regulations of how things should have done, or how people should do things, or how you should do things. And so another interesting thing about this space is that we tend to set limits on ourselves. And I think that's very important when we talk about fundraising, because we set a limit of what's too much in a way and what's too little. And we find a golden middle that's our kind of comfort zone, and everything that goes below, especially everything that goes below what we start to engage in, is called self-sabotage, right? So people set those rules for themselves completely unconsciously based on how much money they think they deserve, how much love they think they deserve, how much happiness they think they deserve. And if you scratch a little bit, and I used to work a lot on one-on-one work with hedge fund managers and founders, you would see that there is a limit. And if a person kind of crosses that limit, what happens is like, no, this is not, I don't feel comfortable there. And so the exercise I think I would like to do, if you're up for that, and Simon told me nobody's going to have a piece of paper and a pen, which I said, it's okay. So you can take out your phone, and this is going to be very private for a lot of you, but I think this is the way to really start inspecting that code, because what happens, most of the thoughts and beliefs and assumptions are completely unconscious. And the work of us as psychologists and you as researchers and coders is to actually inspect the code, right? So if you get a job and you're supposed to fix somebody else's code, you have to see the code first, and you need to understand what the fuck that person was trying to write and what are they trying to accomplish. And so you're also run on a very similar code, right? It's a psychological code. And pretty much when you look at the code of the human mind, it's a binary code. The neuron that fires or doesn't fire. Right? So it's really not that sophisticated. But it's just taken, we have 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections between the neurons. So that it's very, that's what human beings are, that emergent of all those neurons. But when you really look at the neurons, it's really not that complicated. And so most of the things happen in the background. They kind of happen in the back of the head, in something that we call in psychology conscious or subconscious. And so what I would like to at least start exploring with you is to start observing that code and understand what is your program, what are you running on, who programmed it, and how did they program it? Okay, make sense? Okay, cool. And so the question I have for you is, you can take out your phone, and this is just for you to, we're not going to share that with anybody, so this is super private, but this is just for you to start, figuring out what's in here. So the question that I have for you, I actually have 4 questions, okay? The very first question, you're just going to write a number, is how much do you think your product is worth? Whatever product you have, whatever money you're trying to raise, how much do you think your product, your idea is worth? So write a number. The second question is, how much money do you think you deserve? The third question is, if you're a VC, if you're an investor, how much money, if you were to give money to yourself, how much money would you give to yourself, given how you pitch right? And why? Why would you give yourself that much money? And then the fourth question is, if you were to upgrade your fundraising game, your money game, your kind of psychological, mental game of money, with one skill, there was one skill that you could use to upgrade your money game, what would that be? Okay. So this is just for you. If you want to share it with somebody else, feel free. But we don't have time. I mean, I usually just go into that very, very deeply. But one thing that you will notice, and I've seen it over and over and over again, is that those brackets that I've been talking about, they're real. I mean, they're as real as there are in your head. And so what you will notice is people, people say, oh yeah, I'm worth like 250,000, I'm worth 2 million. And then when you realize, how much do you really think you're worth? People will give a number, and that's usually the number how much they feel comfortable earning, and this is the number that they usually as much as they earn. And so something we've been playing with and we've been exploring at SelfHackathon with other scientists is the whole topic of money shame, and where do those brackets come from and how we can actually hack them, because it turns out that there are brackets on both sides. So if you make too much, people feel shame about that. And if you make too little, people feel shame about that. And shame, from my perspective, as somebody who studied shame for many, many years, shame is the most toxic human emotion. And it cuts very deep and affects us very deeply on multiple levels. I don't have time to go into that, but it's fascinating research. Moving swiftly to the second part, how we get coded and how we operate and how we can hack ourselves, is the heart space. And this is really the space that's currently is the primary operating system, and it's the oldest operating system. The emotions by far run the show. And I'm a very cerebral person, and you talk to anybody in academia, and you see that still people admit that it's actually the emotions, those very strong emotions that run the show. And so, talking about money, because I actually want to frame it in terms of money and kind of fundraising. Another question that I have for you, if when I say money, what's the first association that comes to you? What comes to your mind? Just think about that. So money is X. And so what you will see is that money is power for some. Money is security. Money is love. For a lot of people, money is love. Money is status. Money is achievement. Money is freedom. So in other words, money is a means to get something else. And that's really interesting, because that really starts, the story starts unfolding when you actually think, what happens when I don't have money? What happens when I ask for money? What happens when I don't get money? If I don't get money, does it mean I'm not going to get love? Does it mean I'm powerless? Does it mean I don't have my freedom? Does it mean I'm tied? Does it mean that is inherently showing I have a low social status? There's a whole bunch of stuff happening here that happens when we actually don't get money, when we get, rejection or whatever. And so this is up for you, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff on you, but I'm trying to kind of cover all the pieces of the complexity of the psychology of money. And so one thing that I work with, that we work with a lot with people, especially entrepreneurs, is fear. And one of the major fears that entrepreneurs have is fear of failure. And it sucks. And in Silicon Valley, you go to Silicon Valley, they will tell you, embrace the fear of failure, and it's great. But let me tell you, it fucking sucks. Failing sucks. Not getting money, getting rejection, really, really, really sucks. And it hurts. And there's research showing that actually our brain perceives rejection as a physical pain. We perceive social rejection, so somebody saying no to our face, as a physical pain. It's pretty much the same neurological networks between physical pain and social pain. And so one thing that we can work with on fear is there's a concept in psychology called name it to tame it. And the idea is if you're able to name your emotion, you're able to tame it. And so a lot of people, and I work with a lot of Google engineers, and I say, what do you feel? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, no, there's no such a thing as nothing. You're probably feeling so much that your system has shut down, so you feel nothing. But most of the time, we feel something, and that intense feeling, something happens to our mind. And so a lot of people talk about fear as the saber-tooth tiger that existed, millions of years ago, and that it doesn't serve anymore, and we don't need it anymore. This is a caveman kind of feeling. From my perspective, fear is the most powerful emotion that we actually have to respect. And so the metaphor that we use is naming it to taming it. So in other words, so instead of being afraid of the tiger, you actually name to walk the tiger. And so in psychology, what happens in psychology is when the fear kicks in, and how many of us feel fear? Or fear is an issue? Fear of failure might be an issue. Yes, no? Okay, a little bit. Okay, I see everybody raising hands. Excellent. And so what happens when there's fear, what happens is there's part of the brain that kind of takes over, and then the whole brain goes into fight or flight or freeze mode. By engaging the linguistics part of the brain, so in other words, literally saying to yourself, okay, I'm afraid, this is fear, or this is shame, or this is humiliation, or this is excitement, whatever it is. The other part of the brain, which is the Broca area, kind of turns on, and what happens, the two parts of the brain, the two hemispheres start to talk to each other, which allows you to kind of calm down the entire system and calm down the brain. And so one thing that I highly, highly encourage you to do is actually naming the emotion and treat it, as an experiment. What happens when you actually acknowledge the emotion and name it? Because if you name it, you can tame it. So that's kind of the hard space. And about fear, I could talk for the next 2 months, but I have only 20 minutes, which I'm pretty sure are over now. But I will continue going because I want to cover more. And I want to talk about the body, because I think the body is the hardware. We can, unless the singularity happens anytime soon, this is not going away, right? You are physically locked into your body. What happens is, when you look at human interactions, a human body interacting with another human body, the last thing we actually pay attention to is what people say. The very first thing we pay attention to, they say the first impression is 7 seconds. Actually, it's 0.4 of a second. Okay, it's 400 milliseconds. So it's a split of a second. And what we pay attention to as human beings is, first of all, we look at the body. We look at the body posture. And what you will see is, just by playing with open pose, closed pose, you send very, very different signal to another person. So the very first person, when I judge anybody, and you're judging me right now, and many of you, so I can judge every single one. But I look at judgment based on your body posture, whether people are leaning in, people are leaning out. But just playing with the body, this body is the very first kind of thing that we pay attention to when we interact with another human. And let me tell you, when you pitch, and I've seen many pitches, and I train many people in pitches, this is the very first thing that comes out. How does that person come across? Just physically. Are they confident? I call it core confidence. Or are they, ashamed and scared, or hyper excited, which is also, that shows actually anxiety. So the very first thing we look at is the body posture. Then what we actually see and hear is the voice. And it turns out that in the voice, we convey much more information than we actually think we do. And so what we look for is almost like, there's this research showing that actually dogs, they put dogs into fMRI, and it shows that dogs don't really understand human language. What they pay attention is the pitch of the tone, and that's what they react to. In a way, think of humans as, in a way, dogs. We also pay attention to the pitch. So high pitch, low pitch, we can detect fear much faster than we can see fear. We can detect fear from human voice. And so the second thing we pay attention to is how people speak, how fast they speak, and what's the pitch. The third thing that we pay attention to when we assess somebody, before they even open their mouth, is the facial expression. So we pay attention to the mouth and the eyes. And what we look for is this slight smile. It's kind of like encouragement. And then finally thing, what we pay attention to what people say. And so, interestingly enough, my husband has spoken to more than 1,000 hedge fund managers, and he's a VC. He invests in hedge funds and startups. And I was talking to him about this presentation yesterday, and he said, usually what I look for is that core confidence. And he says, too high up is this jittery hyper excitement that is actually painful to see in a way. Too much, too low is this kind of automatic behavior. And so what they're looking for is this golden middle where somebody is grounded and present and confident what they do. Because ultimately, and many of you probably know, people invest in people. They don't necessarily invest in ideas because ideas can change. And you can see that pretty much all over Silicon Valley. And so what happens is we invest in people that we like, and we invest in people that are trustworthy. And those two elements are mostly conveyed through the body. And then, of course, what your idea is and all that stuff. But the very first impression we make is through our body. And so what I invite you to do is study the people that you find to be confident, study the best pitches, look at politicians because they're actually pretty good. Just pay attention to the recent debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and who came out as crazy and kind of bullying, and who came out as fairly confident. And start playing with your body, because this is really our tool of, in a way, it's a tool of work. That's we kind of forget that we are those bodies, and not only have them. And then finally, and I have to wrap up, is the others. And we are ultimately social animals, and social animal is my field of study. I do believe that, yes, we are individuals, but there are extremely powerful forces that work from the outside that shape us. And those forces are the human beings. And I recently gave a talk, and actually Simon was there. I did the closing thing for, I guess, Drop Us at TechCrunch. And there was a panel about growth hacking. And then this kid was saying, oh, and you send the email and you do this and you do that. And then somebody who I found to be very wise, he said, the ultimate way of growth hacking is other people, because you never know who somebody is going to introduce you to. You can know all the techniques, but if people actually don't like you, if people don't trust you, that's about it. And so you never know who you're going to talk to. You never know who that person knows and who they're going to introduce you to. And so we call it the tribe or the mastermind, which is extremely, extremely powerful. And so one thing I want to talk about is that split between people who would say, amazing idea, go do it, sky is the limit. And I invite you to surround yourself with people like that. And then there's other type of people who will say, who do you think you are? Go get a job, etc. And so I recently spoke with somebody from YC, very high up in YC, and they say, this is a reason. There's a reason why we call, and YC is one of the best business incubators in the world. And they say this is a reason why we call it incubator, because what happens is if you have an idea or if you have a startup, it's almost like an egg, right? You need to put in an incubator and put warm light around it and kind of isolate it from other people so that it can grow. And that's why we put those entrepreneurs into a 3-month program, and we call it, YC incubator, because this is where the egg is growing. This is where the idea is growing without all the toxic, are you sure this is a good idea? Who do you think is going to buy this? And so what they do is they alienate this idea and the team away from this kind of blah, 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 blah world around the world, and allow it to grow. And so my question to you, and this is kind of self-reflection, is are the tribe, are the people that you're surrounded by, are they allowing you to kind of incubate the idea in nice, warm, fuzzy light, or are they poking and you know, criticizing? Because what happens is, we, being social animals, we are willing to forego whatever that baby of ours is in order to, you know, gain that social consensus. And so who are we surrounded by is by far, from my perspective, one of the best ways of mind hacking. And there's research showing that actually when you look at the brain, there's really no one part that would say, you know, I am this. Most of the beliefs we have about ourselves in the world are beliefs that we gather from the people that we surround, to spend the most time with, and we surround ourselves with. And so at some point, and I've gone through this many times, you got to upgrade your friends, and you're going to upgrade, you know, the people who you surround yourself. Okay, so I want to sum up, because, you know, I can go on forever and ever and ever, but the summary really is that success is a mind game, and it gets played here. And in order to play this game well, in a way, we have to be aware of 4 major elements, which the first one is the head and the thoughts, and you have to inspect the code and really, I invite you to become an investigator of yourself, kind of like a programmer of yourself. Try to understand what is the code and who is programming you, because ultimately, so if we're not programming ourselves, somebody or something is constantly programming us. The second one is the heart, and it's that emotional intelligence, the emotional equilibrium and equanimity. Then is the body, making sure that you not only have it, but you own it. And then finally is others, and leveraging others and using actually others as your growth hacking kind of machines. I think that's it. I just turned myself on again so I can hear you guys.